Hello everybody, it's Mike here. Welcome to EOH-TV. This week, very excitingly, is South by Southwest. That is a huge film festival that happens at this time every year. Of course, usually it happens over in Texas in the US, but this year it's virtual, which means that I've been able to access the festival and watch and cover every single horror movie playing at the festival this year from the comfort of my living room. I've got a couple of guests who are joining me throughout the week covering every single horror movie with me at South by Southwest. So we're going to be bringing you 4 solid days of spoiler-free reviews and recommendations. So here we go then. Day 1, we've got 3 incredible horror movies to discuss. Joining me are my 2 guests. First of all, EOH regular Louise Blain. Hello.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
I am very good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very, very excited about everything South by Southwest.
I am very excited to get started. And also joining us is Brad Hanson. Hello, Brad.
Hello, mate. How you doing?
Hello. Good. How are you?
Swamped. Lots of stuff to watch.
Lots of stuff to watch, right? Obviously, this is the first time South by Southwest has gone virtual. Louise, is this your first South by Southwest experience?
It absolutely is. And I think that's there's really very, very few benefits to the pandemic, but this is actually one that I'm putting in the pro line because I don't think I would have had the excuse to go to South by Southwest, really. So I think future online hybrid festivals might be a really nice thing in terms of accessibility.
It's been really nice, hasn't it? Brad, what about you? This is usually in Austin in Texas, right? You've never done this festival, have you?
It's one that's been on the hit list for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. But obviously it's a very difficult one to get to because it's expensive. But what I do love is like the diversity of this festival compared to sort of other genre festivals, because obviously the genre aspect of South by Southwest is quite small in the grand scheme of things, but it's really consistently strong, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. How have you found the quality overall? And we'll get into all the specifics with the films, but Louise, just generally, would you say it's been like of a good standard in terms of the horror stuff?
Oh, the bar's been incredibly high. I think initially I thought, maybe I've started out lucky, and then the more films I watched, the more exciting it got and the better it got. So it feels like it's a really high quality. In fact, anything I've watched that I've not liked has actually been in the minority, which, as you and I, having just done a Fright Fest where we didn't quite enjoy everything, I think that's link on screen now. This is, it's another league entirely in terms of quality this year.
Oh my God, it's been such a joy. Brad, what about you? You've done quite a lot of festivals the last couple of years. We covered Fantasia together, and obviously we do LFF and stuff. How do you find the quality of this one so far?
Well, what I'm quite interested in is I don't often give short films a chance.
Yeah.
Hands up, sorry. And we've just gone through the entire catalogue, and I've got to say that even the quality of the short films has been very, very, very strong. And the films that we've been fortunate enough to see and the films that are coming up that we haven't had a chance to see yet, all the ones that we haven't seen look really interesting and very diverse and very wrestling with some interesting subjects and topics. And the films that we have seen, there's some really strong contenders for great horror films from 2021 just being shown in this festival alone.
Yeah, well, let's kick off. We're going to start... Let's start with Broadcast Signal Intrusion, shall we?
Look how happy Brad is. Brad's going to do it. Look how happy he is.
Look how happy. Brad, give us a little plot rundown of Broadcast Signal Intrusion.
Well, you know it's a good film if I'm positive about it. So Broadcast Signal Intrusion is directed by Jacob Gentry. The basic plot synopsis of the film is that in the late 90s, a video archivist unearths a series of sinister pirate broadcasts and becomes obsessed with uncovering the dark conspiracy behind them.
Indeed. So, Brad, you're a fan?
Big fan. Mm-hmm. Big fan. So it's a slight cheat that we do know some people involved with making this film.
We do. Yeah, we do. We should say this is produced by friend of the pod, Giles Edwards, and also a regular contributor on the podcast, Dan Martin, also did sort of practical effects, but also actually directed certain sequences in this movie. But it also features an appearance from a friend of the pod, James Swanton, as well. So yeah, we do, and we do know a lot of people involved in this film, which is why it's very lucky that the film is actually great.
I was dreading it, mate. I was like, if this is fucking shit, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
But fortunately, it's fantastic. What I love about it is the first act is sort of this pulpy, noiry, brick-esque kind of parallax view-esque paranoia investigation into these intrusions of these really deeply unsettling, and they almost feel dangerous when you're watching them, when you're presented with them. The sequences that Dan has directed, they feel like you shouldn't be watching them, like they're not meant for you, although they've been interrupted and placed into a broadcast as the title suggests. It feels like this is not for your eyes to see. And there's a real menace to those sequences, and you can completely understand why Harry becomes so obsessed with trying to figure out who did these and why they did these. And it really harks back to kind of the old age of early internet adopters and sort of viral videos and virality in that regard, where people were trying to work out like where this stuff came from and who made it and what was the intention behind it. And there's if you go onto YouTube, which you're on right now, but if you go onto YouTube and look at sort of conspiracy videos, they're a huge market for them right now. And this film kind of taps into that like quest for knowledge, so to speak.
It does. It's so good, so creepy. Louise, what did you think of Broadcast Signal Intrusion?
I really loved it. I fully agree with Brad and how it's such an intriguing, thrilling mystery. But what I really love about it, and it is about that virality, but it's because it's so analog and it's all based on VHS recordings of these broadcasts, because I'd forgotten about the fact that broadcast signal intrusions are a thing. They've happened. People have literally taken over different stations with whatever they want. And I think the idea of the pursuing of the truth behind something, but you can only find it on videotapes and you can only use old school tech to find it. Oh. I think all of that is really irresistible, because you feel like you're pulled along entirely, because no one can just go onto Google. At one point he's searching in some ancient I can't remember what system it is. He's putting like one key at a time. Feels painful. So I think it just constantly thrilled. And also it's really scary and disturbing and strange. Those intrusions are weird, and in the way that Possessor felt invasive. They're those kind of creep into your brain and not like it, but it's fascinating.
I loved it as well. I kind of agree with everything both of you have said. It's my favourite so far that I've seen of the lineup. But it's really, like you said, Louise, it's a really intriguing mystery as well. And that is something that I feel like I've missed this, and I don't think I realised how much I missed it until I saw this film. Like a good story. Like this guy is uncovering this mystery of these kind of weird subliminal broadcast intrusions and messages, and he kind of goes on this wild goose chase, right? And it reminds me a little bit, I think there are definite J-horror influences, right? And it reminds me a bit of The Ring. And you forget, obviously, because The Ring is so renowned as being this terrifying movie, but the bulk of it is this procedural mystery where this woman unearths this story behind this tape. And it kind of feels like this movie does a similar thing, right? And I loved, I don't know, like I've watched so many horror films in the last year that we've all talked about together that are all about mood and dread, and that's great. But actually it was really nice to see something that was like a really good mystery that you could get your teeth into and follow a character kind of on a journey, I think. So that was great. But then also, like you guys said, the signal intrusions are creepy as anything. Dan Martin, who directed them, did an amazing job of just creating these like grainy, uncanny, terrifying images that, like you said, Brad, they feel unsafe, don't they? They're not okay, those images.
Well, they're deeply inspired by a viral video called Tara the Android, I Feel Fantastic. Have either of you seen it?
No, I'd never even heard of it until you mentioned this to me, yeah.
I don't like it. I was watching it late at night and I was like, I want to turn this off.
Yeah, this movie just has so much of that. It's like, I don't know what I'm looking at, but I don't like it. There's also a kind of creepypasta vibe to it as well, marble hornets and that kind of thing, right?
It does feel like a creepypasta.
So, Broadcast Signal Intrusion, massive thumbs up from all of us. And as far as we're aware, right, Brad, this doesn't have any kind of distribution yet.
At this juncture, I don't believe so, but you can bet your bottom dollar that UK viewers of this episode will be seeing it at Fright Fest.
Oh, yeah.
As the film came from a script that was optioned from their New Blood screenwriting initiative.
Ah, Amazing.
Interesting.
Oh,
Okay.
well, that's great. That's great. You know, what a great movie for Fright Fest to have as well at some point later on down the line. Awesome. So there you go. So that was Broadcast Signal Intrusion. Let's talk about something a little bit more academic. We're going to talk about a 3-hour folk horror documentary, Woodlands, Dark and Days Bewitched, a history of folk horror. So this is a documentary made by critic, academic. She also runs the Miskatonic Institute, doesn't she? Kier-La. And this is a feature-length documentary on the history of folk horror from the 1960s to today. So it's a real in-depth look at the subgenre. Louise, what did you think of Woodlands, Dark and Days Bewitched?
It was 3 hours long. So it meant that I literally split it up into bits because it's amazing because it's so dense and it's got the most incredible talking heads. It's got the most incredible excerpts from all the films because sometimes you'll find that these things are talking about that they don't have rights for, so you can't see them. But this feels like the most in-depth, incredible investigation into, I mean, you say yourself, you've covered hours of folk horror and it took you 30-40 hours to go through folk horror, so 3 hours is actually quite short. But in that time she goes through British folk horror, American folk horror, Japanese, you look all over the world. Australian I found especially interesting with the sort of adoption of Aboriginal stuff. I think it's really in-depth and I would cut it down into chunks to watch it because you don't want to forget or sort of lose any of the information because it feels really valuable. So I found it really interesting.
Bradley, you're not the biggest fan of folk horror, right? What did you think of this documentary?
I think it's really impressive in how exhaustive and expansive the documentary, the wide reaches in which it goes. As you rightly say, I'm not the biggest proponent of horror of folk horror. There are bits I like.
That does not count.
And there are other bits that I'm not such a fan of. But what I loved, like Louise said, was there's stuff to put on your Letterboxd watch list. Like they touch into so many untapped resources, especially as you say, the Aboriginal, Australian horror, folk horror aspects of things, the European aspects of things. I find that I was like, oh, I want to see that. Oh no, yeah, I want to check that out. And they're talking about the Babadook, and then they're like, before the Babadook there was Celia.
Yes,
and I'm like, what the fuck
brilliant.
is Celia? Like,
I literally wrote Celia in caps in my notes, being like, find this.
Looks really good, really good.
I'm like, what the fuck is this? I need to watch this nightmarish kind of hauntingly beautiful, ethereal waking nightmare. Yes, please, I'd love that.
I agree. I think I know that a lot of people that listen to this podcast I've seen on social media, people are very excited by this. I think if you're a fan of the horror, I don't think this is the sort of film that's going to necessarily have a big wide reach because it's quite niche and it's quite academic and it's quite in-depth. But I think for us, for horror fans, if you're a fan of the history of the genre, it's amazing, right? And I think, I agree with you guys. The first kind of hour is going through a lot of the stuff that a lot of us might already know about. I think if you know about folk horror and you love folk horror, it hits all of the major players, Blood on Satan's Claw and The Wicker Man and all that stuff. But which is great for sort of people that are new to it. But what I found really interesting is the second half, I think, particularly where it went off, like you said, to all of these amazing titles from around the world that I had never heard of. And also it kind of crosses over into various other, the way in which folk horror is a thing that no one can really define means that you can go off into all these different areas, right? So they also talked a bit about sort of voodoo zombie movies, and they also talk about occult movies and witch movies and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty broad, isn't it, Louise, in terms of like how far they go and how it spreads.
I think it must have been an absolute nightmare in the fact that you think you know what folk horror is, which even in the first hour you're like, yes, that's all the folk horror, that's me, done, tip.
Yeah,
and then suddenly you're like, no, I'm learning about Candyman's influences, and suddenly you're at The Craft and all of these things. So I think it was a really good way of understanding the horror that we watch and why we find it so unsettling and how so much of it comes from. If the idea that you could sit around a campfire to tell the story means it's probably got a folk horror element to it. So I think that was really interesting. I really loved it, but I will say that I did watch it in chunks, because otherwise I think all of those amazing talking heads can easily just go over your own head after you've been listening to people for so long. So I'd almost like it as a 3-part documentary series instead of a mega movie.
So that leaves us on to our last movie of today, which is Gaia. This is directed by Jacko Bauer, and the plot synopsis: in the depths of an ancient forest, something has been growing. Something older than humanity itself, and perhaps greater too. When a park ranger discovers a man and his son living wild, she stumbles onto a secret that is about to change the world. There you go. Quite vague. I mean, you don't really get an idea of what exactly this is, right, when you read that synopsis. Quite intriguing. So, Brad, let me come to you. What did you think of Gaia?
So we've seen over the last year or so, there's been a huge uptick in eco and biological horror. And this is another examination of kind of the land returning to reclaim what was once is. And this film has got some beautifully shot visuals and some striking sort of set pieces and scenes. But for me, it's got kind of sort of like religious allegories in the third act. Obviously, we're not going into spoilers too much, but to me, it felt more just like a sum of its parts, like another ecologically set horror film. But I've seen it done in more interesting and better ways than the way that Gaia presents it.
I agree on how well it's shot. Some of it's beautiful. I've never seen such lovely algae as I saw in Gaia. Some gorgeous algae. But I think I did feel like I've seen it before. And I was texting you at the time, Mike, and there's a number of video games that it takes liberally from.
Yes.
In terms of imagery and in terms of content, to the point where certain development studios should really be calling their lawyers in terms of design.
Yeah, it's
and
not subtle, is it?
No, it's not subtle. And that to me actually really, it kind of was off-putting for me. And I also found it lost itself in the third act a little bit, where I was really on board to start with. And then there became a lot of quite intense sort of dream sequence type stuff, which I'm never really into. So I liked a lot of the idea of it, but again, I just felt like I have seen it. In fact, I have played this.
Yeah.
And I've played it better.
But also, I wanted it to be more like what I thought it was going to be in terms of closer to a video game. Like, I wanted it to be a bit more fun, I think. When it starts, and like you say, like you guys mentioned, it looks beautiful, it's stunning, and this beautiful kind of sort of, rural landscape that we're looking at, and forests and rivers and all this stuff. And when it starts with a kind of a character going off by themselves and we hear what might be some sort of creature or monster, I was like, brilliant, it's going to be like a Monster in the Woods movie. And it kind of is that, but then it's got other stuff on its mind, doesn't it? That's the thing. It's got much bigger themes, meatier stuff going on, which is great. But I've got to admit, not to sound really basic, but I kind of just wanted it to be like a Monster in the Woods. I kind of could have done with a bit more fun.
I'm going to be the last of us to say which video game it is.
Worked so hard on that.
I got a couple lined up on this one already. I don't know why they're so scared of these guys, because they seem like a couple of fun guys to me.
Oh, don't. That's terrible.
There's not much room for these jokes, Brad. There's not much room.
That was the third one and you took it.
Oh, no.
From your cold, spore-covered hands.
Yeah, so there you go. So we've said it. I mean, basically like spory, fungusy, mushroomy sort of zombie creatures that come from the earth, right, that look identical to the monsters from The Last of Us. Yeah, like to the point, like you say, Louise, where it's actually distracting how much they look like them. Yeah. So there you go. So Broadcast Signal Intrusion, Woodlands, Dark and Days Bewitched, and Gaia. It's been a good mix for the first day. I imagine I know the answer to this, but what's your pick of those three of the day? Louise?
Broadcast Signal Intrusion. Absolutely.
Brad?
Broadcast Signal Intrusion.
Yeah, same here. Broadcast Signal Intrusion. But I did also love the folk horror doc, so there you go. Guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Looking for more horror content? Subscribe now for more videos like this one and listen to the Evolution of Horror podcast. Head on over to evolutionofhorror.com.